apart from the online, apart from the online book launch that you did with Windhorse a couple of days ago, I think we're the first centre you're visiting, is that right? To do a book launch? Yeah. So it's a real pleasure to hear Devamitra. Well, we'll see what he's talking about when he talks. he might know by now. He didn't know a little while ago, but so yeah, just a little bit about Devamitra. Devamitra was ordained in 1974. January, yeah, great, that's important, yeah. And I think you helped set up, you set up the Norwich Buddhist Centre in 1976, yeah. So a very early centre that Devamitra set up, and since then he's been studying, practicing and teaching the Dharma, and especially as a teacher at the London Buddhist Centre. And I hear that Devamitra really loves teaching the Dharma there. So he also has a Nottingham connection. So Devamitra is also an actor. And I heard that his Nottingham connection is that he was an actor in the Nottingham Playhouse Company.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that was.
69 and 70.
Right, yeah, so before your involvement with Buddhism.
Just,
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
2 years before.
Yeah, okay, great. And another Nottingham connection is that Devamitra was actually here apparently for the opening of this Buddhist centre.
I was.
Yeah, I've seen photos of when people came to open the Buddhist centre, and I think in those days Sangha actually really encouraged all order members to go to the openings of every Buddhist centre. So there's this lovely photo of everyone just gathered out on the sort of pavement out here, this whole collection of sort of order members and others for when the centre was opened. Yeah. So I don't know Devamitra personally, but I know that he's a friend of Kshantikara. So we had Kshantikara with us 2 weeks ago. And Kshantikara often speaks of Devamitra very, very fondly. And he particularly rejoices in the fact that Devamitra was really able to sort of meet him very fully. So Kshantikara coming along as a young man with lots of energy. And he really appreciated that Devamitra very fully sort of met him and engaged with him with a lot of kindness, but also a level of challenge, which I know that Kshantikara really appreciated. So yeah, that's sort of my main connection with you, Devamitra, is knowing of you through Kshantikara. Yeah. But yeah, it's a real pleasure to have Devamitra here, and yeah, just really looking forward to hearing you talk about your book this evening. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Online? Good. Glad to see you all enjoying yourselves there. So I'd like to extend a welcome to you this evening, and of course towards all of you present in the shrine room this evening as well. I am really delighted to be here. I found the lockdown very difficult, not so much because because I wasn't lonely or anything like that, like a lot of people have been, but just because I missed what I consider to be my cultural life. And that it doesn't just include going to the theatre or what have you, but classes, actual interaction with people, because that's what gives the Dharma its life. And so I'm really pleased that at least some of you can be here in person this evening. And I hope the next time I come, whenever that might be, when I write my next book, there might be a full shrine room here. But of course, I'm particularly pleased to come back to Nottingham because it has very dear memories from me, because I went straight from drama school into the Nottingham Playhouse Company when I was a young actor. And at that time, the Playhouse had a fantastic reputation. There was a wonderful company there under John Neville, who sort of, he's very, very famous. He was my hero when I was a schoolboy, because at that, I spent my late teens living just outside Derby in a place called Borwash. And my English teacher used to bring us to productions at the Nottingham Playhouse when Judi Dench was there, when John Neville was still artistic director. And it was a key turning point in my life, actually, because seeing John Neville play Oedipus in Sophocles' great tragedy convinced me that I could not live without becoming an actor. I mean, it was I knew I was meant for the stage from the age of 4, by the way, but by 16, it wasn't just, I was raised in Middlesbrough, which is a pretty grim place, but at that time I was taken to Middlesbrough Empire by my grandmother, and it was just, the Empire was a variety theatre, so my role models then were comedians. So I wanted to become a comedian like them, but what I really wanted was to be on stage, and what I really, really wanted was to be able to move people to the extent that John Neville playing Oedipus moved me when I was 16 years old. I never forgot that. It was a turning point in my life, not just because it sealed my fate, as it were, but because I think it just opened up a whole new vista for me. Earlier, around about that time, I'd already been delving into European literature and English literature, especially the Russians. I loved the Russian writers. And I was a working class lad. None of my family were remotely interested in any of this. They were horrified when I wanted to become an actor. But once they saw me on telly, they sort of got used to the idea. But then, horror of horrors, he wants to give it up, which I did after 3.5 years when I came into contact with the Dharma. Bit of personal background, a bit of connection with this place too. So yes, Nottingham holds some quite fond memories for me, because it was my first time working as a professional actor, and I was very fortunate to be on stage with some very fine actors when I was so young, although they weren't all that good, but most of them were pretty good. Anyway, enough of that. So what I really want to talk about this evening is themes which are connected with my book. And I think I'd like also to make a connection with what's about to happen, that is to say Parinirvana Day, which is actually on February the 14th, you got the right date, which you're celebrating here a week tonight. I'm doing a launch on the Parinirvana Day celebration of West London this coming Sunday, but one of the things I wanted to explore on that occasion was the origins of the Parinirvana in a certain sense, which you can trace right back, I would say, to the Buddha's going forth, because what it was that moved him to go forth was a realization that all living things are subject to old age, to sickness, and to death. And he looked those facts of life, of facts of existence, the harsher realities of existence, full in the face, it seems. But he was able to see beyond that. He didn't just see those 3 sides, he saw the 4th side. He saw the wandering ascetic. And for someone so young, and he was probably much younger than the traditional age that's attributed. It's traditionally said he went forth when he was 28 or thereabouts, leaving behind a wife and a son, which he may well have done. But the very earliest accounts make no reference at all to a wife and a son in the Aryasana Sutta, which is not the earliest account, by the way. But nonetheless, it's the Buddha's own account. He describes himself as a youth, and he describes his, there's no reference to a wife or child, only his aged and grieving parents. And in there's another sutta in the Sutta Nipata, which is a really very, very old text, the Going Forth, the Pabajja Sutta, where the description of the young Prince Siddhartha, having gone forth, suggests someone very much younger than 28, maybe even someone in their late teens, that young. So we don't know how young that he was at the time that he left home, but it could have been that he was really just, 18 or 19 years old. He's described as a youth in the text. And so if we assume that that reflects the reality, because you can't really, I'm not going to offend anybody, but you can't really describe someone who's 28 as a youth, forgive me, but I think you're no longer a youth if you're more than 28 years old, but actually if you're more than 20, I would say, probably even less, but he was described as a youth. And so for someone so young to have the ability to look full in the face those facts of existence, but even more than that, see beyond them, see something positive beyond, is quite remarkable. And of course, we know he was a very remarkable man. We know that he was an exceptional human being. But that's always struck me, the fact that somehow he had the imagination to see a way out of old age, sickness, and death. Of course, at that time, he didn't know precisely what that way was, but he had an intuition of it. He had some feeling for what he had to do in order to achieve his goal. So this, for me, is the beginning of the Buddha's journey, his sort of facing of old age, sickness, and death. And of course, that whole process, initially culminates with his gaining of enlightenment, realizing the truth as represented by the wanderer. And then his 45 years, or however long it was, of communicating that truth for the benefit of others. And that whole process, of course, culminates with the parinirvana. So let's just ponder that a little bit. For the Buddha to have been able to do that before he gained enlightenment, so young, implies to my mind that he was a very, very emotionally positive person already. Because to face those things without becoming depressed, as many people would, or becoming bitter about life, must be very, very difficult. I mean, there's even an instance in the Pali Canon where the Buddha left a group of monks contemplating death and impermanence, and when he returned to see them sometime later, they had committed suicide. So clearly he had not he'd not perceived, he'd thought that they were ready to do something that they weren't. So we have to be very, very careful when we start talking about, and I need to remember this while I'm speaking this evening, when we start talking about death, old age, sickness. If you're going to contemplate these things, if you're going to reflect upon them, and as Buddhists, it certainly is important to do that. It's important that you have a positive basis from which to do so, which is why I presume we did one of the reasons anyway, why we did the Metta Bhavana practice this evening, because it puts you in a more positive frame of mind. I know there was another more serious reason why we did that Lee in Cambridge is in a coma and seemingly not doing very well at the moment. And so all those people who are really close to him will be feeling death and impermanence, or at least the possibility, let's hope it doesn't happen, but the possibility of death and impermanence impinging directly upon them. Because when someone close to you dies, that's what happens. You're brought face to face with death, with impermanence. I remember very, very well the first time that happened to me was when I was only 17 years old. Well, I say only, but I was 17 years old at the time, and my paternal grandmother, who I was particularly close to, died, and I just didn't know what had hit me. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know that she was seriously ill. That was concealed from me. So that when she died, as it happens, from breast cancer, it was a deep shock to me. And I suppose that was the point at which I woke up. Maybe that was something, I think that had an influence upon my later life, the course or the direction of my later life. But we need a positive basis to really face these things. So when I was diagnosed with cancer, which was in November 2016, I was very, very fit, very healthy. I had a few scrapes with death. I mean, I should have been knocked off my perch when I was 32. Actually, I was nearly killed by a fence which was blasted onto me from a huge fence in Boston, Massachusetts, which a wind had blown on top of me, a very strong gale force wind, covering me up to there. I don't know how I survived that particular accident. I should have been killed by all accounts, but I survived and walked away without a broken bone or anything. I've got pretty thick bones, I should think, or did have. But really, when I was diagnosed with cancer, for the first time, I was confronted by my own mortality in a sustained way. And that's a much stiffer test. When my GP told me that she was referring me to the hospital for an urgent appointment for suspected prostate cancer, I knew perfectly well that she was convinced that's what it was. And I also knew, just from the expression on her face, that it was serious, as it turned out to be. But I knew immediately that the most important thing I had to do was to maintain skillful mental states. That the biggest battle that I probably faced was with my mind, not with my body. As it happened, it wasn't a battle at all. It was not that difficult. In fact, I was able to sustain positive mental states throughout the whole process, which rather surprised me, but I don't know why it should have done really, because by that stage, I'd been practicing the Dharma for 45 years, or thereabouts. And clearly, over those years, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, decade by decade, some momentum had gathered. And I quite often like to remind people of this when I teach meditation, because, or even just talk to people about practicing the Dharma, that I think that the effects of your Dharma practice, I think that the effects of your meditation practice are very subtle. Occasionally you might have some dramatic experience in meditation, or even outside the context of meditation. That certainly happened to me, but it tends to be relatively rare. For the most part, you're just sitting there working with your mental states, or just trying to be aware of them, if nothing else. When that's, in a way, that is one way of, that's the beginnings of working with them. But I think that it took me many, many, many years to realize that the effect of Dharma practice is slow and subtle, and so you need to be patient. And we live in a society which, above all other things, lacks patience. And that's partly because you press a button and Amazon Prime delivers to you the next day whatever it is that you want, which might be a very good thing if it means you're ordering my book. But it means that we get used to having things on tap, so that when they're no longer there, when you can't get what you want, maybe you had a taste of this during the lockdown, you don't know what to do quite. You feel a bit lost and you feel impatient. Why can't I? Why can't I? I think that the practice of the Dharma calls for very great patience, something which really does go against the grain of our present society, which seems to me to be particularly characterized by impatience and irritability if you don't get what you want pretty much immediately. So we've been almost programmed to expect things on tap all the time, but you can't approach the Dharma life like that. It takes commitment, it takes time, it takes patience. I say this to the young men I live with frequently. They get fed up with me saying it, but they laugh because they know it's true. And it's very, very hard to develop that sort of that attitude of patience with your own practice. But I do mean patience, not just being passive, of course. If you're practicing the Dharma, it means you have to have an active engagement with the Dharma, an active engagement with your meditation practice. Actually, put some effort into it. But for the most part, I would say, if you practice the Dharma sincerely, just have confidence in it. Sooner or later, it will bear fruit. I can, if I look back over my life, as I often find myself saying that in talks these days, if I look back over my life, which I frequently do now, I know perfectly well that I changed very much for the better over the past almost 50 years. But much of that change happened very, very slowly, very gradually. Yes, so that's just a general point I wanted to make about Dharma practice. But let's come back to the theme I said I would explore, which is contemplating your own mortality, or reflecting upon your own mortality. When you get cancer, you really are confronted by that. Because I didn't know whether or not my cancer had spread for the first 11 weeks or so. I had to have various scans and what have you. Fortunately, at that stage, at least it hadn't. And so I'm still here this evening. But, I was for the first time having to sort of deal with that on a continuous basis, knowing that I could have been terminally ill. Even now, I know that I'm certainly not cured. I'm only in remission, which is not the same thing. My cancer could recur very, very quickly. So you live with a certain awareness that all this could come to an end very quickly. And in any case, sooner or later, it will. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, you have the unfortunate example of possibly, let's hope not, but possibly someone who has had an accident so young. And I have friends who died when they were young. I imagine most of us do. It does happen. It doesn't just happen to old folks like me. So if you're faced with this sort of reality more fully, one of the things that I have found is that it helped me in a very strange way just to relax more deeply. And by that, I don't mean I mean relax in a sense in my mind more fully. One of the things that I immediately became aware of, it sounds a little bit sort of grandiose, I don't mean it like this, but was that I could no longer solve the problems of the world. To the extent that I was trying to do that, I mean, what could I do anyway, frankly, but at least I can try to, I've been trying in the course of my life to help people to practice the Dharma and so on and so forth. I've been trying to practice the Dharma sincerely myself, but in the hope that would have some sort of positive impact within the society in which we all live. But of course, I can't solve the problems of the world. But what I mean is that knowing that it was possible that I could be terminally ill at this point, which is the sort of initial period of before I was fully diagnosed, I knew that I couldn't trouble myself over things that were happening in the world which had the potential to trouble me. I just had to let them go. It was not going to be my problem anymore. There was a certain sense of relief and liberation I gained from that. So there were a number of things like that which happened to me and which can happen when you find yourself in the situation that I was in, when you're confronted by the possibility of your own not too distant death. But anyway, it turned out that my cancer was potentially curable. And so I went through all the hardcore treatments, chemotherapy followed by radiotherapy with hormone therapy in the background, and they're all pretty unpleasant, I can tell you. But it's also a test. Anyone who's certainly been through chemotherapy or radiotherapy will tell you just how difficult that is. And apparently it's easier than it used to be. I can't imagine what it was like in the early days of chemotherapy, but it wasn't a walk in the park. It was pretty tough at times when I was going through chemotherapy, and I had 4 months of it, when I was at times pretty much hardly able to stand or walk. But I could write, and I managed to sometimes sit at my desk and make myself write. And that was the origins, really, of the heart of my book. I'd started writing before I went through chemotherapy, actually, but I did, at that point, I didn't imagine that I'd give a whole account of the process, which I eventually did, and which you'll find in my book. But sort of being reduced by the impact of those treatments in the way that I was to a very feeble, effectively old man. I know I used to think of myself as an old man. It was during that period I once went to see one of my GPs who said to me that she was talking, I can't remember what we were talking about, but she just suddenly said to me, "Well, now that you're elderly," I said, "What?" Well, I didn't say it, actually, I just thought it. The impudence of it, the elderly, but anyway, yes, of course. Slowly old age creeps in on you. And cancer treatments, believe me, sort of accelerate that process. In fact, I frequently use a service called Prostate Cancer UK, a wonderful service where you can speak over a helpline to prostate cancer nurses, and they know quite a lot about prostate cancer. And one of the things that one of these nurses said to me on one occasion, I phoned inquiring about something or other, she said, "Well, you do realize that hormone therapy induces a sort of premature old age." And I said, yes, I'd already worked that out, but there it was. She was saying what I knew to be the truth. I knew that was the truth of my own experience, that I suddenly felt like an old man, until I was 68, I think. That's when I was diagnosed. Yes, I was diagnosed when I was 68. Until that time, I was extremely fit. I was a fitness swimmer. I used to train with triathletes. We used to do some pretty crazy routines. But I was very, very fit and very sleek. But all that just went. I did try going back into the pool, but I just didn't have the strength anymore. I doubt that I could swim at all now. It's one of those things which was taken away from me. Now, all this sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? I don't mean it to be, but it's. I took all of this in the spirit of a challenge. I knew that there was a challenge that I had to rise to. And one of the sort of basic principles of the Dharma, really, of Dharma practice, is to make the most of adversity. And that's what I've tried to do. I picked that up fairly early on in my practice of the Dharma, and valued that as a way of practicing. So something unpleasant happens to you. Well, of course, the first thing is not to react to it, or to try to not react to it. That's the first thing. But the next step is to actually take advantage of whatever it is that afflicts you. It doesn't have to be illness. It could be all sorts of things. I mean, you may find yourself in some way or other thoroughly humiliated by people, by circumstances or whatever. and facing that, experiencing the humiliation that comes to you, can be a very positive experience. And I'm not suggesting for one moment, by the way, that we should humiliate other people, not deliberately, but you don't have to do that. Life is humiliating. When you make mistakes, and you have to acknowledge it to yourself, and especially when your friends notice and bring it to your attention, that's really quite painful. I mean, who anyone present enjoy critical feedback? Actually enjoy it. I mean, I don't. I get it all the time from the young ones, but I've had it all my life because I've been I've had a bit of a reputation when I was younger, certainly for being insensitive and overly outspoken and all that sort of thing, provocative, all these things, and that landed me in all sorts of trouble because I come from Middlesbrough and the people from Middlesbrough are blunt. Certainly my family were blunt, every single one of them. So it's like in my bloodstream. I shouldn't say I can't help it because that's not a very Buddhist attitude, but it's something which has molded me, which has conditioned me, and that conditioning runs deeply. It's very difficult to break these things down. You can certainly become more aware of them and try not to make the same mistakes again, but that you're these deep what we call our sanskaras. I mean, my bluntness may not be a sanskara, or come from a sanskara, but those things which we bring, according to Buddhist tradition, from a previous life into this life, especially the unskillful elements in our character, they run very deep and they're very, very difficult to overcome. I had a seriously embarrassing thing happen just a few months back, and when I actually acted quite foolishly. There was a young kid riding one of those motocross motorbikes, which make a heck of a racket, in the park near where I live, and riding it very fast. Actually, and it was. He was making a terrible racket. People were getting out of his way. They were scowling. They were obviously very unhappy about what he was doing. No one was doing anything about it. So I turned to my young companion. Said, "We should do something about this." And he said, "Not me." Anyway, I tried to bar his way as he approached the exit. And I waved him down. I'm afraid I did it a little bit angrily. And anyway, he did slow down. And he wasn't very happy with me. And anyway, he slowed down. He scowled at me as he passed. And I scowled back. I'm not proud of that. And I said something which I'm not going to repeat. I tell this story to Subhuti, a long-standing friend of mine. We've known each other since forever, but I was staying. Some of you probably know who Subhuti is. Anyway, I was staying with him in August, shortly after this happened. I said, "Subhuti, this is what I did." And I asked a question to which, of course, I knew the answer, but I needed to hear it back from him. And first of all, he just laughed and laughed and laughed when he heard the expression that I used with this young man, because it's very uncharacteristic. I can't even remember having done anything like this before in my life. When he calmed down, he said, "Well, I said, look, I've been practicing Dharma all these years, almost 50 years. I've been on a 9-month solitary retreat in which I feel I really come quite deeply. I've been through cancer treatment, and I felt that's been a really, really insightful experience for me. And yet I do that. Why?" Of course, he just laughed and said, "Well, of course, because these things, these habits, run very, very deep in us, and they're not easily overcome." He then went on to relate something which didn't reflect too positively on himself, which had been fairly recent. We had a good laugh. We had a good laugh about that as well. But Yes, so it's not easy to change. I've completely lost my thread now. Anyway, we'll get back there. I'm sure it's all relevant. I just lost the thread. Let me think a minute. Oh yes, it's just that our own mental states, our habitual modes of being, our habitual thought patterns are the big challenge that we face. And of course, especially our mental states, because that determines our actions. In the incident that I just told you about, of course, what was motivating me was indignation, which is not a very positive mental state at all. I failed to empathize with this young kid. He couldn't have been more than 15, but I could have approached him in a kinder way. I might have been able to get through to him in a way which would have helped him to see, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. But I don't think that what I did would have in any way discouraged him from doing it again. So that was a tough lesson to learn at the age of 73. But making the most of adversity was what I was trying to explore. So yes, we may experience things other than illness which humiliate us. I felt deeply humiliated by my own behaviour on that occasion. I did turn to my young friend who I was with, who was in his 20s. I could see he was a little bit impressed. I said, look, I wasn't proud about that, by the way. But something fascinating going on outside in the square here. I tempted to go to the window and have a look. Yes. Anyway, anything in life which is difficult, you should see as a challenge. I try to bring that attitude to these things myself. Our little humiliations, even just being ill, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to your patience. And if you go through the treatments that cancer patients have to go through, and I'm sure there are many other procedures as well, some of them are really quite humiliating. I won't go into the details. As well as being rather unpleasant. But I've always tried to make the most of adversity, so that when it came to dealing with the cancer, I treated it in that sort of way. Here was an opportunity to go further. Here was an opportunity to deepen my understanding and experience of life. And that meant specifically old age, sickness, and death. There's no question, old age is slowly creeping into my life, more and more. And it's not going to get any easier. I've been seriously sick. I've had a very serious cancer. I still have it, potentially. Death can never be that far away at my age. Of course, we never know when we're going to die. Theoretically, I could live for another 20 years. When I remember on one occasion when I was with Bhante, Sangha, the founder of this movement, I spent much of my life living with him, by the way. I went in to see him on one occasion, and he told me that he'd just been listening to a program on Radio 4, which he liked to do. And in this program, it had been said that one person in 4 of my generation could expect to reach 100. And he looked at me, pointed at me and said, and you will be one of them. That was before I got the cancer. But I don't think that's likely now, for all sorts of reasons. But as you grow older, you have to face these things more and more. And unfortunately, when people get diagnosed with cancer, many of them become depressed or they recriminate, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? and so on, or they just feel generally bitter about life, and that never helps. I met some very, very remarkable people when I was being in the hospital, fellow cancer patients who are dealing with their cancers, and some of them had far worse cancers than mine. So positively, I was deeply moved by that. So it is possible, even for just people who seemingly who don't have the Dharma, who don't have any significant spiritual ideal. You can maintain, you can sort of hold a positive frame of mind towards all these things. So, for example, if someone behaves very badly towards you, you can react with anger. We know that, but that never helps, or rarely helps. As in the case of me, that young boy on the bike. I mean, it didn't help him to do what I did. It certainly didn't help me. Perhaps it made me a little bit more aware that I've got a lot more work to do. But I knew that anyway. Even though I think I made a reasonable amount of progress in this life. But anything which life throws up in your face, as it were, doesn't have to be a cancer, but something difficult. Even just having an enemy, someone who really dislikes you, is a challenge. Something you can meet, something that you can use as a tool to help you grow, to become a better human being. Well, I think time is probably getting a bit short now, so maybe I better stop there, because I'd like to see if you've got any questions. I've hardly said anything about the book, but you know why I'm here, to promote the book. Not just to promote the book. I mean, I'm delighted to be here anyway, actually, but I thought I'd probably say a bit more about the book than I have done. But if you have any questions, we've got a little bit of time. I don't know what time we need to stop and go downstairs. 9:30. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions.
Does your book focus on Does your book focus timeline-wise? Is it on the journey that you had from the cancer diagnosis, or?
There's a bit of introduction, but not much. I mean, basically, there's a sort of prologue. It's a kind of preface, really, which gives you a bit of the background to my life, and then go straight to the diagnosis. Sure. Then the bulk of the book is about diagnosis, the treatment, etc.
Yeah, interesting.
So it is actually quite a full account of cancer treatment.
Sure.
But I think one more thing I should have said is that I have an irrepressible sense of humour, which surfaces very much in the course of the book. So watch out. I had to have my dear friend Manas, who's a theatre director, so we've got that connection. Actually, Shantikara trained to be a theatre producer. We used to joke about, well, we've got the basis of a theatre company in Sakati community. Manas did direct me in a play, actually, but we won't go into all that now. But Manas had a remarkable eye for narrative line as a dramaturgist, and he helped me enormously to maintain the pace of the sort of narrative. But yes, the narrative in a way is, well, it's not the most important part of what's in the book, because there's a lot of reflection in there as well. The reflections that occurred to me at the time, and sort of trying to sort of, my attempts to deepen my sort of understanding of the Dharma, it's all in there. And a lot of humour, a lot of good gags. The first launch we did was online on Monday night, and Manas was interviewing me. And he looked at me with a big grin on his face and said, "Devamitra has a cheeky sense of humour." That's his way of describing it. So I hope if you do buy the book, you'll find it entertaining. As part, then there's a pun in the title if you didn't sort of twig it, entertaining cancer as a host, but also entertaining for the reader, I hope. Yep. Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Devamitra. That's really moving. I think I sort of a question of wondering, like, what the role of your friendships were like throughout that process. I wondered if you could say anything around sort of how that was for you, and you know, the significant relationships, I'm sure, with you practicing within the movement for 50 years or however long it's been. Can imagine that, you know, you'd had some strong connections. I wondered if you could say anything about that during that process.
Certainly. In fact, I think it comes across very strongly in the book. The fact that I have many friends, and I've been very blessed, really. I have lifelong friends like Subhuti and Sona and Buddhadasa and a few others that I've known all that time. We've remained good friends, and others I've gathered along the way. And most of the friends that I see on a regular basis now are very young. I mean, by comparison to 73, for sure. I'm more than twice the age of the second oldest person in my community. So, you know, they're all in their 20s and 30s. But they've been remarkably helpful to me. I mean, communities the personnel in communities tends to change rather a lot. But over the time that I've been living in Sakkavati, this period, which is just over 6 years, everybody who I was living with at the time of the diagnosis and the treatments really went out of their way to help me and support me in whatever way they could. They couldn't do enough for me. I was very, very moved by that. And other friends who I didn't live with, but who were in the, you know, who lived around the LBC or whatever, sent me flowers, brought me baked cakes for me, all sorts of things. And that was very, very, I found that really, I was deeply touched by all that. Some of my long-standing friends came to see me. They came from far-flung places to see me. And I think they thought I was going to die. In fact, one of my friends told me afterwards that she'd concluded that I wouldn't survive the treatments because I looked so rough. Anyway, I did, for better or worse. But yes, my friends have been very, very important. I got so many cards from people. Countless cards just came from all over the world, sort of wishing me well. And it was almost like there was a tangible sort of, it was metta. I felt this metta being directed to me from all sorts of people. Some who I didn't know very, very well, but nonetheless who felt, who'd heard that I had the cancer and that I was pretty sick with chemo or whatever. And they just wrote so kindly to me, and that was a huge support to me. And of course, members of my community would come and sit and talk with me when I was particularly immobile. For 5 weeks, I was reduced to a wheelchair. I just couldn't walk. But it was a wonderful phase of my life. I mean, I don't remember saying this actually, but Stephen Mann said the other night that on this online launch that he remembered me saying when he asked me one day how I was, and I said, well, I don't think I've been happier in my life. And that I certainly had that sort of sentiment. I did feel that in some degree or other, because of course it was not an easy time for me physically, but there was something quite wonderful going on, and this is the main thing I wanted to get onto, which I didn't get onto, which was that if you contemplate impermanence, if you're really sort of living with it, what begins to open up more and more is you see the hidden beauty in things. And I saw that more and more clearly. I looked at things which I'd seen many times before, which I even considered to be beautiful, but I hadn't seen it to the same depth. There's an avenue of trees. There's a road which leads up to the entrance to the main park near the London Buddhist Centre, Victoria Park, and there's an avenue of plane trees. And I'd often noticed them and appreciated them. But when I was confined to a wheelchair and being wheeled along the street, didn't have to look where I was going, I didn't have to take in anything else. I could just look up, and I was so struck by the beauty of the mottled bark of the trees and the sort of the wonderful arch of the foliage at the top as it joined from both sides of the road. And it really, really struck me. I'd seen it many times before, I'd appreciated it before, but not to the same extent. And I also went to, during this period, I went to a concert at the Festival Hall, South Bank in London. Mitsuko Uchida, who's a Japanese, very wonderful Japanese-British concert pianist. She's Dame Mitsuko, by the way. And she's playing Schubert and Schubert sonatas, 3 Schubert sonatas, and the 3rd sonata, which is one of my favorites, and which I knew to have been written by Schubert at a time when he knew he was terminally ill. And her playing that night, and Schubert's music just completely transported me into another world, really. And I've always loved that particular piece of music, but or at least for a long time, I've loved it. But on that occasion, it just struck me with greater force, just how beautiful, just how moving it was. So this was very much a sort of byproduct of all the treatments I was undergoing, the sort of the fact that I still didn't know whether I could survive in the long term. I still don't know that, actually. There's also a degree of uncertainty with cancer. There's an odd coincidence which happened today, which was that the last time I was here, I remember waiting at St Pancras station to get the train to Nottingham, and as I was waiting, I got a phone call, and it was from the hospital that was treating me. I knew last time when I came here last time, I knew I had a cancer. Nobody here knew that at the time, but it was a call from the MRI unit at this particular hospital to fix an appointment for me. And just after I arrived here today, I got another call, the only call, apart from that one, that I've received from the MRI unit at my hospital to confirm another appointment. Because it's possible that my cancer is beginning to recur. We don't know that for certain. This is why I've got extra scans. So with cancer, you never quite know where you stand. There's always an element of uncertainty, and you don't know where it's going to go. I mean, in my case, the cancer, if it has recurred, it could have recurred anywhere in my body because the cancer got into the lymphatic system. And my oncologist warned me about that at the end of radiotherapy. She said, because it's got into the lymphatic system, it's very, very difficult to cure. But there was 50%, it was 50% chance that it would recur. It may not have recurred, by the way, but there's a possibility. She's being very cautious, I think, by getting me these scans. But coming back to your initial question, friendship has been so important to me during this period, but it's been so important to me during the whole course of my life. I was very, very fortunate to form 1 or 2 early friendships, which are still with me. We've been very, very loyal. Subhuti and I and others have been very, very loyal friends throughout our lives. Doesn't mean to say it's always been hunky-dory and easy between us. It hasn't, frankly. But there's so much mutual goodwill and fundamental well-wishing that we can trust each other in that sort of way. So leaving aside the cancer, it is so important. This is a wonderful emphasis that Bhante has given us on the importance of spiritual friendship. which is not that common in the Buddhist world, I'm afraid. So we're very fortunate. And that's one of the things I continually reflect upon myself, just how fortunate I have been in this life. I can't quite fully believe it. Despite the cancer. That was a very long answer to a question. I mean, anybody else got any questions? Yeah.
Is there any advice you would give to someone who's ill, but may not have as many friendships?
I was asked that question by Steermanis the other night. He warned me he was going to ask me some difficult questions, and that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, I think the bottom line in all cases for me is you just try to maintain the most positive frame of mind you can and remain the most positive mental state that you can. But I think that in the absence of the support of friendship, that's not so easy to do. And unfortunately, many people who are ill don't have their friends, or some people just don't have friends. Some people live on their own. I mean, I certainly know of one or two people who've had cancer quite seriously, who've been living alone with not many friends around them. And that must surely be very, very difficult indeed. That's one of the reasons why I feel I am so fortunate, blessed, frankly. If you don't have friends, life anyway is going to be difficult. It's so important to develop friendship, and the most meaningful friendship that anyone can develop is spiritual friendship. And I really feel for anyone who's going through a serious illness who doesn't have those friendships in place. For anyone who doesn't have that, I just don't know the answer to that question. I know that the NHS is concerned about people having their support systems, as they would put it. And I think that means, basically, I think it just means human company. I remember when one of my friends, this had nothing to do with illness, but something really terrible had happened. And he was inconsolable with regards to what had happened. And I went to see him, and he couldn't talk, and I didn't know what to say to him. So all I did was hold his hand, and that was enough. It was just like human contact, even physical contact, and human warmth goes a long way. Just human presence, a warm human presence. But if you don't have friends, where are you going to get that from? It's a problem. And many people nowadays suffer from terrible loneliness, and a lot of young people as well. So it's a big problem, and I think that's one reason why we've got to expand this movement more and more and more and more to get more and more people involved, so they can all benefit from the positive benefit, from friendship and so on and so forth in its kind of context. But even outside the context of Triratna, of course, I'm talking about Triratna because I've dedicated my life to it. But any sort of social context where there's some meaningful friendships can be established is so vital. But we live in such an atomized society, and it gets worse and worse as far as I can see. It's becoming increasingly more difficult for people to do that. Spend so much time in front of a screen. Yeah. Anyway, I've gone over time. Only by 1 minute.
Yeah, just thank you so much, Devamitra. Very, very moving and entertaining. And yeah, just really, well, in a way, just a sort of call for us all to practice the Dharma, develop friendships, and prepare our minds, our beings. And yeah, really, really appreciate you. So let's give Devamitra a thank you.